Hi, and welcome back to another one of our online lectures here in world history. Today we're going to complete our journey as we have been looking at Islamic empires. In the first lecture, we looked at the Ottoman Empire as seen here. In the second lecture, we looked at the Safavid Empire, which was mostly in modern-day Iran. And now we're going to move even further east to India as we finish up by looking at the Mughal Empire. So the Mughals are going to be, long time descendants of the Mongols, but there's also going to be a lot of differences that we need to discuss. So we're going to come back to our constructive response question one more time. The question has said, generalize who were the Ottomans, the Mughals, and the Safavids. And again, the three things we're trying to really build into this is where were they located, who were they, and why were they significant? And we're going to try to answer those today, which we can then use as details to answer this question. But we're going to start the Mughals here, the same question we started the last two empires with, by looking at where were they located. Again, location always matters. If you're not in a good location, your civilization just will not survive. So if we look at where the Mughals were located, they were in northern India, but we're going to see how they moved south, eventually reaching southern India. So they will pretty much encompass the entire subcontinent of India. Now, there's going to be several people we're going to look at here in our story of the Mughals. The two most influential in the early days are a guy named Babur and Akbar. And we're going to look at both of their actions and what they did to help expand the Mughal Empire. So, let's talk about who were they. The Mughals, we're going to look at specifically some certain rulers here. Now, the Mughals are actually descendants of the Mongols. You kind of hear that in there, Mughals, Mongols. They're not, Genghis Khan, but they are some, after the Mongol Empire dies out, some of the southern Mongols become the Mughals. So, the story starts when a brilliant general named Babur swept down into India and laid the foundation for the Mughal Empire. Well, he was very young. He was only 11 when he took over in 1494, and he was able to move south. In the years that followed his taking of power, he swept down into India and really just proved himself to be a brilliant general. By 1526, he had led 12,000 troops to victory against an army of 100,000 troops commanded by the Sultan of Delhi, and Delhi is a city in India. A year later, he also defeated a massive army in that region again. So, he proved time and time again that he was a brilliant general. And without his skills, this Mughal Empire may not have ever happened. Babur's grandson Akbar comes to power a little bit later, and he ruled India with tolerance from 1556 to 1605. This is worth mentioning because this is an Islamic empire, and you'd think they'd only really want Muslims in their territory. But we're going to find that Akbar is actually very tolerant towards other faiths. In fact, to prove this, he was going to marry several other women of faith, different faiths, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Babur, though, he had a very strong military, backed by both artillery and cannons, which allowed him to move south into the Deccan Plateau. And I'll show you on the next slide where the Deccan Plateau is to kind of give this a geographic look. You have to remember, though, when we talked about the Ottomans in this first set of Islamic empires that we're looking at, we said they were all gunpowder empires, meaning all of the groups here, the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals, all had gunpowder, and that makes you a significantly better army, especially if you're going up against a military that doesn't have gunpowder. So that's part of the reason why these Islamic empires were able to grow and expand. Again, I've made this point several times. That doesn't mean they were brutal, violent conquerors. Doesn't mean that all Islamic empires were brutal and violent. It just means that some of them were, just like there were Christian empires and other empires that expanded through warfare. So I just want to make sure we're not automatically thinking that all Muslim empires were just conquering, army-crazed people, because that's not the case. By moving south into the Deccan Plateau, he's going to unify a land of over 100 million people. You have to remember, India is one of the most populated countries in the world even today, and it was back at this time as well. So by taking over all of this land, you're actually controlling quite an impressive empire when it comes to population. But here's that point I was making just a minute ago about religious toleration. Babur believed in religious toleration. We know this because he married a lot of different women. It was customary in their culture that the leaders could do so, and so he married, among others, 2 Hindus, a Christian, and a Muslim. And he let them all keep their religious practices. He didn't make the Christian wives become Muslim or the Hindu wives to become Christian or whatever. He let them continue to have their beliefs. And so he was really good at that. He also proved his tolerance by abolishing both the tax on Hindu pilgrims and a tax on non-Muslims. Got rid of those taxes that used to exist that basically forced people to become Muslim. So he definitely believed in religious toleration. Now here's the growth of the Mughal Empire. What you can see here in this deep purple color, this is Babur's empire. So he moves south and starts taking over. He has that brilliant defeat here at Delhi against that 100,000 troop army, and continues to move south. His son was not a very good leader. Let's bring that back. But his grandson, Akbar, was able to add everything in this reddish color. Here's the Deccan Plateau, so he moves south into this region here. And it's going to be another leader a little bit later, Aurangzeb, who's going to bring us all the way down to the tip of India. We'll talk about him briefly here on the next slide. But basically what we're trying to do here is show how these important leaders are able to conquer land and expand the empire. Without that, the Mughals might not have ever been a real significant group. There's no doubt that art, architecture, language, and writing flourished under Akbar's empire. We have a lot of records, a lot of stories, and a lot of great works of art that were created during this time period that we can attribute to the success of Akbar and his military campaigns. Probably the most shining example of this that comes actually after Akbar is when Akbar's grandson, Shah Jahan, decides to build a very beautiful temple for his wife. Unfortunately, she passed away. What we get out of this is the Taj Mahal, which I'm sure you've heard of. And if you haven't, I'll show you a couple images here on the next slides that will definitely look familiar to you. So Akbar's grandson, Shah Jahan, built the beautiful Taj Mahal for his wife Mumtaz Mahal, who had died at age 39, giving birth to her 14th child. That's absolutely amazing. And it was said that he was so devastated, so sad, he wanted this to be a memory of her and was even going to build a second giant temple in her honor, but never got a chance to do so. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, this is the Taj Mahal. World famous. Absolutely one of the most famous buildings in the world. In fact, the textbook for this course has a Taj Mahal right on the cover. So very, very beautiful building here in India. Another look at it. In terms of architecture from this time period, there's nothing like it. One of the most beautiful buildings of all time. So this happened in the 1600s, if you want to put that in a time period. Here's a problem, though. When you build something like that, you better still be taking care of your people. And that's something Shah Jahan did not do. So while Shah Jahan built, the country was hungry and suffering. And, we've seen this time and time again. The number one role of all emperors or sultans or kings or pharaohs should be to take care of their people. And if they don't take care of their people, you're going to have a decline of your empire. And there's no doubt that was going on here under Shah Jahan. You see the words here, the decline of the Mughal Empire. Shah Jahan's third son, Aurangzeb, drained the empire of resources. He made things even worse. 2 million people died of famine under his reign. His subjects were not loyal to him anymore, and the empire really was crumbling. I mean, in a way, it's sort of what happened to the Romans, right? I mean, they had some economic problems, they had poor leadership, really just couldn't keep things together. And that's probably something we could say just about any other empire. If you have bad leadership and money problems, you're likely not going to survive. So there's no doubt Shah Jahan and his third son, Aurangzeb, definitely helped bring down the Mughal Empire. Why are they significant? Why is it even worth mentioning? Well, there's no doubt the Taj Mahal is one of the most striking buildings on the planet. So the Taj Mahal has become one of the most iconic pieces of architecture in the world. But what's interesting is this is going to connect to one of our units in second semester because the decline of the Mughals allowed for European traders to slowly come to dominate India. I mean, India really doesn't control itself up until the 20th century again, because they leave the door open. They have poor leadership. Then all of a sudden the British show up and many other Europeans, and primarily the British, and they take over the country because the Indians can't stop it. And we'll look at that significantly when we look at our imperialism unit. Imperialism is when another country takes over land that doesn't belong to them. And so it really is going to force the Indians to try to fight for their land, to try to fight for their own freedom, which will later lead to India's independence movement. And this guy right here, whose name is Mahatma Gandhi. So we're going to talk about him second semester. So in a lot of ways, the decline of the Mughal Empire allows India to be kind of a puppet, ruled by other people for several centuries up until the 20th century. Okay, let's finish up our work here on the Mughals and really finishing up all of our Islamic empires here with our constructive response question we've seen multiple times by now. The question is said, generalize who are the Ottomans, the Mughals, and the Safavids. And when we generalize anything, we want to just kind of give a good overview. And so the Mughals, we know they were in northern India, and eventually they reached southern India. A couple of important rulers we talked about was Babur and Akbar. Babur was a guy who kind of really started this. He was a brilliant general, and he swept down into India and really took a lot of the land. And his grandson, Akbar, definitely ruled India with tolerance from 1556 to 1605. Babur himself was very religiously tolerant. He married, among other people, a Hindu, a Christian, and a Muslim. So he was able to blend some tolerance with the different religions that he was intertwined with. There's definitely a lot of art, architecture, and language that flourished under Akbar. His grandson Shah Jahan built the Taj Mahal, one of the most famous buildings in the world. Unfortunately, when he built that, the country was starving and there was a famine going on, so that maybe wasn't the best thing for him to do with his money. And eventually his son, Aurangzeb, really drained the empire of its resources, and the empire fell apart very shortly after that. So this gives us kind of a good overview of the Mughals there in India, finishing up our work here on the Islamic Empire. So hope you learned something. Let's wrap this up in style. Make sure you give yourself a 4, 3, 2, 1 on how you can answer these questions. It's always good to rate yourself, and we'll see you next time.